So, good morning, everyone online. I don't know how many people are there, but we are just starting. We're going to start off for this INTALiNC keynote speech. Welcome, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are, and we'll see you soon. Right, so that's just that. That's that. So just to be aware that you are now live.
Okay, wonderful.
But I'm going to introduce you.
All right. Well, I will.
If you want to.
Yeah, maybe I'll get another chair for Daniel when he comes.
Yeah.
And yeah. Hey, we're trying to do this a little more.
So what I did was I invited Daniel and Jackie to present their keynotes in the same slot, because in between planning the conference and having the conference, Daniel and the network won the Walking for Cities project of BREP. Yeah. So Jackie was already doing the PRISM project, and then Daniel had the Walking for Cities project. And we're involved in all of them, like our colleagues are involved in all of them. So thank you. Well done. And well done, Daniel, who's not quite here yet. Daniel says that he's late because he's having problems checking out his hotel. But I know Daniel was doing karaoke with me at 2 o'clock in the morning. But
Carla, saving things too.
So hopefully Daniel will come and help you.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I'm first as the elder, I guess.
Yeah.
So I could start, and Daniel knows the slides, and he knows, this part.
So, I mean, like, the people will probably like to see you, Jackie. So, yes. Jackie Klopp, thank you very, very much for joining us. As I say, the director of the PRISM project, which stands for
Partnership for Research on Informal and Shared Mobility.
Informal and Shared Mobility, yes. Which we also call popular transit these days, I seem to think.
Yes.
Well, we struggle, right? We don't know what name we're going to give it, but
yeah, I can explain that a little bit as we go along.
And Jackie's from Columbia University in US. Never mind Jackie. And
New York. We stay New York. New York. It's its own place.
New York, which is still okay. It's a still okay place. Right? And yeah, and you can kick us off, Jackie, talking about what the whole idea of researching in the margins, with this idea of, we talked a lot about it around informality. It's like it's not just informal systems, it's informal places, people doing informal activities. And I'm sort of talking to fill the gap while people arrive, Jackie.
No worries. And Ransford, maybe you want to come up next to Carla, because I'm talking about the living labs, and you guys are leading living labs. And so I would like, we might have a little more of a back and forth.
So Ransford leads the living lab in Ghana.
Yes.
And Carla leads the living lab in San Jose. Okay, amazing. In Costa Rica. Yes. Great. And there are other.
And Daniel is also co-leader. Oh, there he is. Oh no, he's not. That's not him. That's Ish. I just saw someone tall.
So apologies for people online, because what we've got is some very slow 3 days in people arriving.
Yeah.
But they're coming slowly.
They are. They are.
Okay, Jackie, so if you can kick us off.
Okay, well, Daniel and I are delighted to be here. I just really want to thank you, Karen, and Emma, and the whole Manchester team. This has been an incredible experience. And Daniel and I thought it would be really important to see how we can link our networks. So part of what we're trying to do is talk a little bit about these networks, PRISM and the new Walking Labs network. And Daniel is a bridging figure. He's also an INTALiNC. And one thing we'd love to do is see the importance of these networks, talk a little bit about how we can all work together, because this challenges are really immense in the kind of work that we're trying to do. So what is PRISM? This Partnership for Research on Informal and Shared Mobility, supported generously by Volvo Research and Education Foundations, is a global consortium at building research, a community of practice, and a strong network of next generation scholars. So it has these 3 pillars. And we really are focused on really understanding informal and shared mobility, not just to understand it, but to think concretely about how we can integrate and improve these systems for just livable. Tanu had the whole list. We'll just take Tanu's list of, all these great things that our cities should be, including just cities. So you see the network of colleagues who are part of this, but this really is an open network. And one thing I'd love to do as we move forward is figure out how to involve more people. So that's why I have INTALiNC up there. You are technically a partner, and we'll figure out how to make that concrete. So we have a philosophy, and it's turned out to be 4 E's. Daniel, please, here. I explained our idea of doing this together.
Which doesn't work if I'm late.
No, you're great. You're great. I heard you had fun last night. That's good. So ecosystems. First of all, I think we've talked a lot about the importance of
having fun.
Of having fun. Yes, actually, to be honest, like in a lot of the heavy world that we're in right now, and a lot of the movements, including like the youth movements in the United States, there is an emphasis on trying to weave in joy because it's very heavy world right now. So yeah, that having fun is important. But so coming back to ecosystems, like ecosystems, we don't mean like just the ecological ecosystem, all that links in, but really thinking in a more systems level. I think we've had that wonderful presentation by Juan, also by Tanu. You can see all the interconnections, and informal and shared mobility should not just be seen as, something that gets you from A to B. It's connected to livelihoods. It's connected to economies and communities. It's very embedded. And so part of our philosophy is to really focus on a whole system and ecosystems. Equity is central. Justice is central. Even though we're in an incredibly neoliberal moment, like it is extraordinarily important that we continue to center that. Engagement. So I think we don't have the luxury of just doing scholarship for the sake of scholarship right now, given the state of the world. So very engaged. And we added this one, exchange, because one of the things that we found incredibly fruitful is to exchange across contexts and, especially self exchange. So just so you know what we do do research, which I'm going to talk about through living labs, a living lab approach. We then try to do meet and greets with our partner, the Global Network for Popular Transport, and we have Lauren here who is part of that. Thanks, Lauren. Jump in if you wish. And that's to bring practitioners and other researchers together in conversation. And that has been incredibly rich. So that's also something I would invite people to if you're interested in being part of that. And then as we do research, we find missing policy gaps that are very serious. So we do these quick policy briefs. I think Karen's been talking about that a lot. It's very important in order to surface these issues and really say, hey, we need to work more on this. So that's been one of our activities. So we're trying to bring these pillars together, and then throughout we involve next generation scholars. In all our research and our policy briefs, we prioritize having young people, younger folks in there. And that's been really powerful because we're giving them the tools for the world that they're inheriting, which is not an easy one. And finally, we do convenings. I'm just back from Mumbai, where we had a terrific exhibition on auto rickshaws, which we are going to bring to our next convening, which is in Bangkok, that we invite all of you to. And it's a historic one, which is one of the first convenings that's really just going to have a whole conference on informal and shared mobility or popular transport, because this is these are the modes that carry the most people, as you know, and yet we haven't had like one gathering that just focuses on that. And when I was in Mumbai, people were commenting that, wow, for India, this was one of the first times everybody came together from different cities to say, let's just talk about this. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a big picture and a flavor for what PRISM does and some of the learnings. And Daniel, feel free to jump in. I've got my colleagues here. We haven't really sort of stepped back and said, like, what's going on in our world? Like, we are in a moment of tremendous transition. We've got the urban transition that we've been definitely talking about, where we're also seeing the peripheralization of poverty. A lot of poor folks getting pushed to the margins. We have a technological revolution going on right now. We used AI in our workshop yesterday, to be fully truthful. But I mean, we're seeing platforms inundate our cities, new technologies that are reshaping labor, reshaping, how movement is happening in our cities, including around freight and deliveries. And that's impacting ISM as well. And then we have a fundamental energy transition that's rocking our politics. The basis of everything that runs in our world, the fossil fuels, the dead dinosaurs that we're using up, that needs to change, because we're already having the impacts of climate, and we have ecological crisis, species extinction, also linked to the way that we're consuming and building our cities, which are great consumers of energy. And within all of this, we see popular transport, which is a bit of a lifeline to many of the folks who are undergoing the worst sides of this set of transitions. So I just think it's important for us to realize we're in this very dynamic moment, and also all of this is happening at the same time. So in terms of approach, sorry.
We need to share the slides. I didn't do this.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
No, sorry, people on Zoom. It's my fault.
Yeah, we haven't got that far. You haven't missed that much.
No.
It's okay.
No, not that. That's not what we want, is it? Zoom. Yeah, I know. I'm just being a dumb person.
Well, no.
Zoom. Really sorry, guys. Sorry.
Yes, sure. There we are. Perfect.
Which one is it?
I think it's this one.
This one.
I think so, yeah.
Share. Sorry, yeah, we haven't missed much.
No, you haven't. Not at all.
Okay, and then we go back to this.
There's always something. This is the lesson, right? Technology always relies on people. In the end, it's not going to be a silver bullet for anything.
There you go.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys, online.
No,
but you can get the slides later.
Okay. So just focusing on our approach. So you have a lot of complexity and a lot of changes that are happening. And it is really important to take an approach that's very grounded. So we have a philosophy with PRISM of democratizing knowledge and listening and learning bottom up with the people who are sort of at the front lines of a lot of this change. So the workers, the small business owners, the passengers in these systems, the communities, all the while connecting in our minds to these system level issues. Why is that important? Because there's also this discourse around this informal and shared mobility as being the problem. And that is a strategy of power that is focused on these vulnerable people who are in some ways filling the gaps of governance failures. And I don't want to look at the system level problems. And frankly, the way I see this is that by studying these systems bottom up, embedded in the communities that they're in, we're looking at problem solving in action. We're looking at the people who are trying to solve the problems created by systematic investment and governance finance failures, because these people do not have the services that they should have, right? And that is too often we just don't talk about those failures and systems problems. And the other thing is, given this history, there's tremendous amount of distrust. And so working bottom up over a more extended period of time with respect with the sector is really important to building that trust that we need to move forward together in cooperation and, frankly, ideas for change.
Before you change, Jackie, if I may add
sure,
something,
please, of course.
Daniel, it's bottom up, but it's also not romanticizing.
No.
And and that's the thing, no? Because when we approach information mobility, especially the informal side, either the literature has been overly critical and kind of dooming uh, as failure, but on the other, it has been the romanticization of informality, and there is ingenuity, there is resourcefulness, there is organization in clear institutional structures, but they need to be understood also in conversation with the public sector, because at the end, we do all advocate for public transport being I mean, maybe not a public good, but definitely a public service. And that, of course, is the responsibility of the state.
Absolutely. And that's why I like to frame this as these are failures of the state and of service delivery. But you certainly shouldn't blame the folks who are trying to fill those gaps for these failures. And that's why I think it's really important to frame it that way. And I think coming to the approach of an urban living lab, I mean, part of what you get in these living labs, I'm thinking also about, I've got my colleagues here from the kinds of consultations that the living labs do. Like, you're getting the views of the passengers, you're getting the views of the workers who are also, they've got serious problems, right? The most exploited, perhaps. And then, you've got the operators who are seeing this often as a business, and then all kinds of layers of government actors. And so the living lab approach, again, allows you to, if you, it's hard, but tries to give you that whole picture. And so we decided to work across different contexts. And so we have actually 8 living labs. We have Accra, Kumasi, which is led by Ransford here, Bangkok, Beijing, Bogota, and Daniel's been doing wonderful work with Luis Guzman and team, Cape Town, Mumbai, and San Jose, Costa Rica, where Carla has been doing great work with her team. And then we've also started a living lab, a proto-living lab in New York City, where we have commuter vans.
I think there is a point to be made about the global south, global north dichotomy, which is something that we saw in the walking program, but it's as true for walking being universal as informal and shared mobility being universal. And perhaps we haven't paid enough attention to what's happening in New York or cities like London or in many other places where informality is also perhaps less visible, but equally pervasive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's often less visible because it's in lower income communities that, like Karen has been talking about, outside of the central city, although sometimes you'll even see it in little jitneys and things coming into New York, in the center, taking people to the periphery. So what I'm going to do now is just give a feel for some of the work in these living labs and some of the important issues and lessons that are surfacing. And we do want to keep some time for some interaction at the end, because we really want to see how we can bring work together, because we appreciate Karen creating the space for us. So I'm just back from Mumbai. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mumbai Living Lab. And they are grappling with this big question of urbanization and these growing peripheries. And the fact that, like in many cities, the poor folks often try to find housing where it is cheaper, that is in these peripheries, like in Mumbai, outside of Mumbai, in like Virar and these other areas. And in order to get to the mass transit, which is the train system primarily in Mumbai, they use shared auto rickshaws. So this is, without the shared auto rickshaw, the city would not function the way it would function. And yet, as my colleague said, these are unsung heroes. They're providing tons of trips every day, and they estimate about 13 million trips a day. So they started working in Nalusapara, which is a suburban area, and using digital technologies to map out the routes. But then they weren't just doing like mapping and collecting the quantitative data. I think one thing we've seen is the importance of these multi-methods. So they were also talking to auto unions that turn out to be connected to political parties. So that is a very interesting political complexity from the beginning. Also, the drivers, and have, interviewed many drivers. So they have a paper on that that's very interesting. And they've rendered this visible. through their work. And the other thing that I think is really commendable about what the Mumbai Living Lab has done is that they have taken their research and tried to communicate in creative ways to draw in some of the critical political actors into a dialogue about the shared auto rickshaws as an important mode in India. So they did an exhibition. They had a rap group. They had a painting that was exquisite. I have a picture of it later. They did a little guide in Hindi and English, which was a zine, which basically took their paper, which is a very good paper on driver conditions, which are quite poor, and turned it into a story that the average person would find fascinating to read. So you see on one side, you've got like the more formal, chart around the conditions of, where, for example, the revenue they get and the high levels of debt and all that. But the average person will not look at that. So they've done tremendous outreach. And through that, we actually drew in a number of folks to have a very serious policy conversation. And we also managed to get into the newspapers. So we're getting the message across. And we also had an interactive part of this, which was, asking questions about what people think after they've been through the exhibition, the future of the shared auto rickshaws. So it's a really great example of trying to do very engaged work and very creatively, and then trying to have impact. Some of the next steps is to see what can really be implemented. And one of the things that really concerns the Mumbai Living Lab is that at these rail stations, you see large markets like what you see here. You have us looking down at the night market. You can just see how vibrant it is. And people save trips this way. They go to work in Mumbai, they come back on the train, they get off, they do all their shopping, they hop on those auto rickshaws that are everywhere but not planned for, and off they go. And this is an essential system. And they've also found that the shared auto rickshaws go to the farmers. This is a kind of peri-urban area, get the produce and help the vendors get to the market. So they're part of a kind of bottom-up transit-oriented development that creates efficiencies and also connection and community for people. It's not planned. The government, if you go from the train station to this vibrant, interaction, it's like a no man's land, because the rail authority just leaves all this space kind of rather awful. And instead of using it to think, how do I plan and include this? I think we've been talking about this. So, their next phase is to figure out like all the overlapping jurisdictions of government authority there to see if this space can be managed in a way that's real, that even makes it more pleasant for people, and also shifts the paradigm where, the government is not thinking, oh, we're going to just get rid of these people, which is what they often do, and put in a shopping mall and some parking. So this is sort of at the forefront of trying to showcase alternatives. And so this is going to be one of their projects. Now, some of you have been asking about scale. I'm going to watch the time because I want to give you enough time. But so one of the things is that what we're trying to do is leverage the PRISM resources to get other resources to kind of expand this work. And collaboratively with the Mumbai Living Lab and Columbia University has managed to get more resources now to do more work in smaller cities. That was another theme. And we're working now in Ahmednagar. They've renamed it Ahilia Nagar. That's the whole politics there that is a backdrop that's important to this work. We can talk about. And one thing that our colleagues, which is SPARC, who lead this lab, the Society for Promotion of Area Resource Centers, which is an NGO, I should have said that at the beginning. What they're concerned about is, as cities are doing all this infrastructure work, primarily roads again, they are moving, they are displacing people. That came up again. And where are they displacing them to? Always to the peripheries. in what they call relocation colonies. So this is they're actively creating exclusion. And one of the things that we're trying to do is we've created a map, and we've actually mapped out the auto rickshaws as well. And there's very poor bus service, like in Costa Rica. We'll come to that. And we look at where they were. These are these dots in the more central city, and the two main dots out there where they're being relocated. And one thing we're going to do is, we've already started, is to do an accessibility study for where they were and now where they are. And we already know, because we've done interviews, surveys with these people in these colonies, that, they're not colonies. They're not given, adequate services, and there's no thought to connecting them through public transportation. So we're both trying to do some research to show and quantify that loss of access. And one of the young economists, I do believe we need to bring more economists in, is actually going to try and show what that means in economic terms, in terms of, lost time, increased travel, loss of access to jobs, going farther for groceries, all these things, and see if we can then talk to officials around their relocation policy and say, you can't just give people a house. Like, you've just shifted their access. And if you're going to do this, then the transport has to be bundled in. And then we're going to go farther with the Living Lab approach to say, well, how, the wonderful, Tano, I'd love to talk to you more about those examples of women creating, their transport for themselves. We have a big focus on women and children, so we're going to try and see if we can learn from those examples and actually try to seed this as a way to show that you need to reconnect. It's very important. So we are taking that Living Lab work and extending it to other cities, and also trying to think how we can have an India-wide conversation. So there's a lot of, issues around the urbanization peripheries, but in the San Jose Living Lab that Carla can speak to more, what we're seeing also is in even central parts of cities like San Jose, there are these pockets. Yep. 5 minutes? Okay. So I want, make sure I have time for Daniel. Okay. So that's also very important. And they've also been doing this incredible work talking to drivers and operators. And Carla has presented wonderful work to show that there's a whole informal system of connecting popular transport to clinics, primarily for women to take kids and elderly to their checkups and so forth, and to get care, all illegal. Meanwhile, tourists are using three-wheelers in parts of the country. So now part of the strategy is, well, all the while they're contracting bus services. So part of the phase for next we've been talking about is that, one, maybe the health authorities would be a better government official to start to bring in and say, look, if you want to keep people healthy, maybe you need to help us regularize, or at least some of these services. And the other thing is to say, look, if you're making these legal for tourists and you've contracted bus service, which we don't agree with, right? We can show you these gaps, like accessibility studies again, and say, like, if you're not going to provide those services and you're providing it for tourists, then why aren't you providing it for local people? So you see, these living labs give us these creative approaches also to some of the politics. Very quickly, the Bangkok Living Lab, we all have papers that you can read. One of the interesting things about the Bangkok Living Lab that's looking at motorcycle taxi drivers and their movement towards electrification, the barriers, is that they're facing electrification and platformization at the same time. It's very complicated for drivers, and a lot of the electrification efforts aren't looking into the actual, socio-technological dynamics that make it often a burden for drivers, and showing that those exclusions are actually a barrier to us making progress on regulating these platforms and also moving forward with decarbonization. So yes, and the worker conditions are terrible, as in Mumbai, and actually across the globe, which is an area that needs more work. I am not going to talk about Bogota because I'm going to pass that to Daniel. But I'm just going to say that through this more grounded work, we've seen some serious policy gaps. One is actually, I credit a motorcycle taxi driver in Bangkok who mentioned to us that, well, or actually to my colleagues, Appy and Saxith and their team, that we don't want to electrify if we're electric vehicles are going to be stuck in floods and our batteries are going to be ruined. Like we can't, we're not interested. And so we were like, wait a minute, where is informal and shared mobility and climate adaptation work? It turns out there's a huge gap. People are doing climate action plans for heat and flooding, and they're leaving these systems out, even though what we found through this brief policy work is that they're often a source of resilience. They'll still operate when other things shut down, providing essential services, but they also suffer great losses. And as we noted, the workers are in precarity. So we have flagged that. We got this shown at the International Transport Forum, and we're hoping a lot more people do work on this. Okay, very quickly, just to sum up, I think what's been really great is people have been saying we do research, but look, we also have to be really careful about our narrative. And what we're trying to do is shift the narrative from, ISM as a problem and the workers as a problem, ISM as an infrastructure, an asset, and a partner in managing this complex socio-political change if we care about inclusion and equity. We want to start focusing on systematic government failures in investment and management of public transportation and walking infrastructure, because that's part of how this emerges, right? And you even see people take popular transport because they're afraid to walk. And I have had people. And then ISM is a justice issue. There's a couple lessons, but for time, I think I'm going to pass it over to you, Daniel. So let's switch.
We're going to switch the proverbial steering wheel of our improvised rickshaw. So I think something that is interesting about all these conversations is how we got to the idea of the Living Lab. And well, you can read the paper. I think it's important to recognize that Living Labs haven't been part of the transport literature for some time. Here, kudos to Tano and her colleagues who organized a special issue in Journal of Transport Geography precisely to put that to the fore. And in a way, what we were looking at in Bogota is such an interesting case to think about Living Labs, partly because it had been going through more than 2 decades, probably 3, of public transport-driven transformation of the city. And I was sharing yesterday as part of a workshop how I am one of the children of Transmilenio, which is the BRT of Bogota. It actually converted many people who were training as engineers and other disciplines of the urban into transport fanatics to some extent. Now, what that means is that Bogota has, and I'm thinking from a scholarship perspective, a huge focus on public transport, formal public transport. Its institutionality, its governance, its funding, and so on. Its impacts, obviously, some of the work that I have done myself with many of my colleagues there. But what we don't know is what was left of the margins. And that's how we wanted to start this conversation when we spoke about it with Jackie. And at the margins, you start finding so interesting things, bicycle taxis, shared taxis, the formal licensed yellow taxis who then start operating informally to serve areas which are not necessarily served by other forms of public transport. And they share cars, the same that we had in the 90s, probably with a more recent number plate. So what we did was kind of looking at this systemically. And I'm going to piggyback on what Tano presented yesterday about the macro, the meso, and the micro, because those are key scales, not only for looking at things out in the terrain, but also from a governance perspective. And one of the things, and here, one of the probably most difficult things, speaking about incidences of our working ways with Luis, is that at the beginning, he didn't quite understand what it meant to improve public transport from an institutional perspective. And I think in Bogota, we are very institutional. We are very, very institutional. Most of our partners are in government, and we have very good relationships with government. But what that means too is that sometimes you need to edit a little bit your narrative, which was going to the point of Jackie earlier. So how did we come about this is what this paper was all about, of what exactly was a living lab when you have it destined to analyze and address more than just understanding, because this knowledge needs to be actionable. Popular transport and popular transport that operates at the periphery. So what we did was we set out working groups, and I think, and you're going to see it later in part of my presentation about walking, the governance of research is quite important, and it's an integral part of what we're doing. And part of that research was precisely to start bringing all of those actors that Jackie had mentioned to see where were the overlaps, where were the interests, where could we start aligning things, people and their agendas for an actionable set of for an implementation, something that is implementable. So we came up with this 6-stage process, which I don't think we have time to go over, but it's important to understand how much we need to build from the ground, partly because of that peripherality, both physical and institutional, of popular transport in Bogota. And what that means is that the inclusive governance needed to come from the research itself and then scale up to the conversation with those stakeholders who have the decision-making power to do something beyond formalizing, which was one of the biggest fears that these operators, users, and even the officials themselves were fearing. And that's what we have learned from Bogota. Which takes me to the learnings, because I've been speaking a lot with Jackie, and being inside but not so inside of Prism has helped me seeing what has worked. I'm not going to say that things haven't worked, but we have learned. Taking on board the learnings, the challenges, and what that meant is that there were many very nice ideas. So when VREF came out with let's have another international research program, it was like, yes, but why don't we do living labs, for example? Which I think is one of the key important lessons. The other important lesson, as I was saying, and that's why I wanted to start my intervention with the Bogota experience, was about the governance of research. So in that dialogue and in that sort of getting to know each other better and knowing our motivations and in a way our own ethics of work has helped a lot building the scaffolding of what is the current incarnation of the Walking Cities Lab. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Jackie, about our various dialogues. So with that, I want to introduce the Walking Cities Lab. And the Walking Cities Lab already existed. So it's been around for a while, which is credit to all our partners that actually accepted us keeping the name, which was the first thing. And then we did a whole rebranding. So you have already experienced the FOMO of our t-shirts, which was by design. But we start with an image for a reason. And it's because the aim, and that was something that we have learned from many other initiatives in practice, particularly with our colleagues in Walk 21, is that the mission needs to be simple. And our mission is to make walking a global priority. Is that. And how we get to that means trying to reframe our understanding of walking and borrowing the language of the BREF existing program on walking as a mode of transport. We played with the words a little bit, and Karen has a lot of to do with that W4T. And the many thousands of emails and messages, some very aggressive, that said, your definition is not entirely clear. So that's how we get to walking for transport, which is a simple way of saying walking that is accessible, safe, and enjoyable for all. So from a simple mission of let's make walking a global priority to a simple definition of walking for transport as a safe, enjoyable, and accessible mode for everyone. So what we are, and here again, we are borrowing quite a few pieces and learnings from many of the initiatives that I have had the privilege, and many of my colleagues have had the privilege of being part of. Obviously, Prism as part of this conversation, but it's impossible not to address the role of INTALInC and the partnerships and the networks and the way that we have created bonds with quite a big number of people. I was impressed myself of how many people I helped on my way into this conference. So that's something that is important. So we are that global hub for research, capacity building, and evidence-based action, dedicated to advanced walking as a key mode of transport. And our aim is to consolidate W4T as a coherent field of inquiry and action. Now, how we want to do this, how we want to consolidate walking for transport as a coherent field of inquiry and action, is by filling critical knowledge gaps with links to various issues, various developmental challenges, but also by establishing something that is not always easy. Theoretically robust, but also action-oriented framework. And those are the big divides that probably have plagued research for a very long time, particularly when it comes to walking. And then thinking about the partners that we have on board, which I'm going to show in a moment, is how can we evolve into a self-sustaining international center for excellence that tries beyond the funding periods. Another lesson from Prism is that we are grateful, we love the fact that VREF has initiated this international research program, but we do want to sort of outlive everything that has been built with these resources, which we all recognize that are limited. So because we cannot do everything, we selected 5 imperatives, 5 themes, which are the ones that we're going to focus on in relation to walking and walking in its role in transforming urban environments and hopefully beyond urban environments. So the first one, which comes from our own history, is the unwalkable cities. That divide between what's walkable, but something that is important that has come out of our conversation is what is unwalked. And I'll talk about it in a moment. The role of walking on climate resilience, and we have seen a lot of examples of different forms of transport in the relationship with climate resilience. And this needs to go beyond counting how many tons of CO2 we save because people are walking more. And then the caring cities, which have, fortunately we had a note about yesterday, and 2 important things: governance. And governance has always been there, and it was one of the key issues that Prism was addressing. But from our perspective, the other big gap was implementation. So how do we move from the saying to the doing, or the literal walking the talk? So to enrich our understanding of unwalkable cities, and there are many people here who are working on that topic, and they need to be recognized because they have advanced the scholarship. Sorry, karaoke voice. It means moving beyond the metrics and the sort of let's count how many kilometers and how much width of sidewalks or pavements do we have, to look at the lived experience, to look at the informal infrastructure, very important, and the various social determinants of what makes a place walkable or unwalkable, or walked or unwalked. In terms of climate resilience, to see walking as an infrastructure that is critical for urban adaptation. And that's something important because we are in the midst of a climate crisis. And that means that there are many environmental shocks that we need to deal with, such as flooding, heat, extreme heat. And how can we protect, which goes to the point of caring cities. So, of course, there is gender as an entry point, but that's not all that we're looking at. We do need to look at caregiving mobilities, as Juan was saying yesterday in his keynote. Think about gender equity, obviously, but I think that the most important point in caring cities and thinking about caring for oneself, mutual care and solidarity, and caring for the environment helps us connect in walking in very different ways, and thinking about violences in plural. And I know that in English, maybe violences is not a word, but we're still going with it because there are different forms of violence, right? The road violence, which is what we have addressed historically as part of road safety, gender violence, crime, harassment, and of course, the conflict and the physical injury. But also poorly designed infrastructure is also violent because you can trip onto a bollard and have an injury. And that's not caring, as Tana was saying yesterday. So we're also looking at the governance, and Jackie's 2 favorite words, political economy, are part of our ethos and what we're focusing on. and also looking at institutional capacity. Because in particular, to not only to try to align different sectors of government, but actually finding who the hell is responsible for walking in different places, because you don't have an owner for walking. And finally, in terms of implementation, looking at issues that we have explored in other research, and Natalia is here, who is leading on the implementation side for Walking Cities Lab, but also for the research on school transport, is the importance of social acceptance of interventions. And we had a whole conversation yesterday in a workshop about how whenever you have a pedestrianization, then the first ones that say no are the local businesses, because they're losing money. So pilot testing, maintenance strategies, funding, and pathways to scalability.
They're not really losing money.
Oh, exactly. No, that's the point. But but we don't have a mechanism to actually say in advance, ex ante, here is my evaluation of how much money you're going to make, which is probably one of the key issues.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
For sure.
okay, I'm going to do this in 6 minutes and a half. We operationalize our objectives to 3 integrated pillars that run across the 3 themes. And here is where passing from PowerPoint to Google Slides plays against me, because we're not seeing the icons. So we have, it's okay. So we have actionable knowledge, next generation capacity, and communities of learning, which are the 3 ways in which we're working to co-produce this transdisciplinary evidence to bridge the gap between theory and practice. And what that means is that we need to always be thinking about the practical implications of the knowledge that we're creating and how we're addressing these gaps. We have schemes for mentorship. We're looking at MSc and PhD curricula. I actually spent, and my Jose also did, the last 3 weeks in Bogota and in Mexico, respectively, with a group of students that were dedicated to look at walking as part of the practice engagement. So we already put this framework to the test with them, looking at, in the case of Bogota, in the case of Merida in Mexico, some of our lenses. So the walkability, the access, and the governance and care were at least the ones that my group was looking at. And that's part of our capacity building efforts. And then fostering these communities of learning, and here the role of our partners in Walk 21 is very important, because they and it, as a group, all the consortium has amassed a huge number of, well, at least contacts, if up to the list. But obviously those contacts are working directly and indirectly for walking, and that's something that is important. In connecting research to governance, but also trying to rethink the governance of research. This needs an apology, because there are many logos here that should be, including Prism. So there we go. It happens. But what we try to say, I can summarize it in a way that we have 30 plus organizations. We have already put on board more than 30 people who are part of the Walking Cities Lab. And we have 3 ways of working, which we're calling a living ecosystem. And that living ecosystem, which is invisible here, unfortunately, but I promise you we have a very beautiful graphic for that.
Oh, sorry. Oh my God.
That's okay. It's okay. We're not shifting blame to anyone. It was my fault, because I should have been here early and checked their slides. So if you're finding guilty parties, there's probably me. So we have an advisory board. The advisory board, which we had put as a satellite, is composed by many brilliant people and many wonderful organizations, including but not limited to INTALiNC, Prism, VREF. So David, who you probably know, is also an advisory board. And we have 4 living labs, 1 per region. For Europe, we decided to go Mediterranean, so we're working in Malta. For Africa, we're working in Ghana, so Regina is one of our colleagues for living labs. For South Asia, we're working in India, and Tan is working very closely with our teams in Ahmedabad and in Bangalore. And then in Latin America, we went Brazilian. So Anna here is one of the colleagues for our Brazilian Living Lab. So that gives us the depth, and that's what we learned partly from Prism. But then because we wanted to invite everyone and money was not enough, we created this option that was the breadth of the startup grants, which are small very specific projects of about a year, which are going to be agile and looking at specific issues within those agendas. So they need to be consistent. And then we have 5 thematic leads, one for each of the imperatives that I mentioned. So here we have a few of them. So Tanu for caring, Maria Jose for unwalkable, and Natalia for implementation. And then we're going to be working across those different strands with a logic that makes thematic sense, and then our advisory board, which gives thematic direction. So with this, I'm finishing, which is we are trying to build this from the ground up, which means understanding what are the gaps and how the current political economy of knowledge production has created some of those gaps. So stop citing as the ultimate truth in the world, that paper about walkability from Ghent, and start looking at what was published from the Global South in other parts of the world, and then trying to address some of those gaps as part of our impact strategy. So with that, I'm going to stop, Karen, so you can start getting us questions.
But that gives you both. Sorry about the slides. I
No,
that's okay.
From Google Slides to PowerPoint, and that's what happened there. But we share the slides anyway. There'll be recordings, and it will all be there. I'm sorry to the people online because they missed the first few slides of you, Jackie. So thank you both. Do you have any? I have a quick question. Who did your amazing picture graphic?
Jim has a person. Jim knows a person.
They've got so much movement in them, haven't they? They're incredible. Any questions? Winnie first.
I just have a question for Jackie. When I listen to the conceptualization of informal and shared transport, I just get concerned, like, the labs really give us new insights, because, for example, when you show Mumbai, we are able to see the share of informal and shared transport, but we are not able to see what the other side is providing, the formal. And my understanding is that to a large extent in the South, you have almost what we are calling informal and shared is the main.
Yes,
and
exactly.
we also talk about, but there are rules.
Yes.
They have rules. So I'm expecting, I know it's still a young lab, but at the end of the day, we are going to have some insights that can help us conceptualize how we consider the informal sector. And again, you argue towards the end, I can't ask much, that there is no owner for walking. It's not true.
Well, it is in some places.
There are owners of walking, including the walkers.
Yeah,
of course.
Apart from that, I don't think there is any state today who has not begun thinking of putting some semblance of something for walking. So I think we are seeing some movement, which is what we expect to get from the labs. What are these new initiatives and changes that are changing legislation?
And make it work.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a lot. I mean, and that's the part of the point, because like for years and years and years, Jim and others have been working with government to bring that agenda to the fore. We've got the Pan-African walking and cycling network now, and I mean, honestly, lots of strategies with walking in them. But I did watch a presentation that Jim, every year he comes to my students here and he gives a presentation on walking, and we get the updates. And I think, Jim, you showed like there were lots of strategies, but not necessarily there was money there and not necessarily implementation. Yeah.
We'll be sharing some things this afternoon.
Amazing. Yeah, Jim.
Yes, can we respond? Yeah. Well, thanks, Winnie, because that's almost like I could have planted that question. Because, first of all, you know very well that I tend not to use the word informal and shared mobility, even though I use popular transport. And the reason I do that is because discourse. Because popular, not in that they're popular, but that these are systems by the people, for the people, and it's the majority of people globally use these. So therefore, I'm actually inspired by more Latin American, popular, movements and economy, and I think it's used as an adjective, right, in that meaning. So I agree with you, but I do think there's new insight, always new insights to be had, and like maybe I'll ask, my colleagues, Carla or Ransford, like Carla, you started working on this and your team put one of the first papers, real comprehensive papers about these forms of mobility in Costa Rica. So maybe you want to respond.
Yeah, like in Costa Rica, we didn't have any, like there was only one article previous to this research program related to popular transportation, even though it's a very extended form of transportation in our context. And there was not a real conversation with the government institutions. So until this research program, they started having information so they could understand how it worked and how it actually filled gaps in the territory. So it was very important because now we have data that points out why users use it, how they use it, why is it important, why they're discovering, how it's related to healthcare, for example. So that might be something that might be studied in other contexts, but in Costa Rica, it wasn't very investigated. We did this research also with Bogota, for example. So now we're having conversations between the same continent in Latin America, but we're Central America and they're South America. So things might be different, but at the same time, we can find similarities on how it works and also how they've been fixing certain of the problems that we have that we haven't got there. So I think it's been very, very good.
Juan.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Maybe seems to be very formal, but we've been having the same challenge with Severus in the last 2 years, which is how you measure impact. Which is a typical question you get from people who gives you funding nowadays instead of you get a quarterback. So, and of course you can show a number of different aspects like research papers, policy briefs, but I think we need to go beyond that, thinking about what Daniel was saying and how to basically think about this after the funding. So I don't know what has been your thinking and your experience and all that, because I think it's a tricky question. I know it's a tricky question, but what have been your thinking about it? Because as a research community, it's important.
Well, I just think also if you're successful in having impact, it's never because of you alone. And if you do this right, then you're expanding your networks and you're, because it's movement. We need movements, right? Like coalitions and movements that can push for changes that need to happen. And so when those changes happen, you can never take sole credit. And I think that's just something we need to think about. And I mean, one way that you do try to get a grasp on that is through more qualitative process tracing, right? Like, who did you bring in? How did this work? Knowing that it's like always kind of a collective effort if you do it well. But then in the end, you should see very tangible things that you can point to. Whether that is in the case of Nalo Sapara, where there's actually a inclusive redesign as a prototype for other, ways of including these shared mobility and transit-oriented development. So we have to do a lot of process tracing and kind of collective dialogue, deliberate, which is not typical for the way people evaluate things. So I agree, like we need a lot more thinking on that. But go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly. For us, I think one of the key conversations that we're yet to have is what our monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework is going to be. And I think that the only thing I want to add to what Jackie already said is that we need to be better at tracking failure or tracking things that didn't go entirely well, because that's where the learning is. And we need to keep an internal reflective eye on what we are doing ourselves as researcher and implementer to actually get that tracking going on. Yeah.
So as a major funder for all of us, Jane would like to ask a question. And I have to give it a call. Because we are all in her pay. Jane, please ask your question.
Yeah, but thank you very much for the presentation. I think it would be useful in setting some of the discussions we've had. Say a few words about what are some of your mechanisms and approaches for ensuring the active and ongoing exchange of knowledge between the labs. And there's always the risk of the silos. And it's also related to the active sharing also
Mm.
So if you were not, as a means of managing the situation as a group. So please.
Well, okay, so look, nothing is ever perfect, and I'm sure there are challenges. So we have these imperfect mechanisms. Well, one, we try to have these monthly research meetings where everyone is open and welcome to come, and then we structure those around presenting some of the work, and then getting a lot of peer feedback. So both verbally and also if it's a paper, try to get peer review of it. Now that hasn't worked perfectly, but I'm going to just defer to my colleagues on this. Maybe you can, Ransford, and I'd rather they talk than me about this.
I mean, just to say quickly that I think also VRF generously funds other programs, and I think we quickly identified that we needed to work together. So there is some kind of working group across all the various sort of programs and projects in different countries. And I think one of the things that we are prioritizing is how best to share data, actually curate the data that we are generating and make that data available and accessible to anyone who wants to use it.
Without blowing our own trumpet too much, that's sort of what INTALiNC is all about, because it's not a hub and spoke network, it's a network. It probably is a network that does this. So I think that's part of that. I think Walk 21 also in that thing. But also what I really think, I think I'm allowed to have a final word. What I really think is that walking is so much a part of popular transit. Popular transit is so much a part of walking. So at the very least, that interaction is common. And without putting walking together with popular or informal or whatever you want to call it, transit, you don't have a system. And so you're talking about the ecosystems of mobility. And I think that is the point. Is this an ecosystem of mobility which has these walkable and unwalkable and usable and unusable popular transit and the formal transit as well in amongst
we had a question for you, Karen.
You asked a question for me?
Yeah.
Well, we really have to stop now because of the online thing and the diagram. But I will be talking about this later. And so thank you for your question. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, what's your question?
Just a contribution.
Uh-huh.
Like if we're talking about